Hi, I'm Pastor Bob Enyart of Denver Bible Church. The elders of our church and I went down to Focus on the Family to give them a presentation on Christian political strategy. We met with Tom Minery, who is their Vice President of Public Policy. It was an honor for us to be there. Tom brought some of the men in his department, and he happens to be James Dobson's right-hand man. So we were talking to the right people on the subject of Christian political strategy. A few weeks later, I was asked by a national Christian leader to give the same presentation in Denver, Colorado. Flip Benham is the National Director of Operation Save America. And he asked me if I would present exactly what we showed to Focus on the Family to his organization. So that's what we're about to show you. So from here on out, I'm going to talk to you as though you were Focused on the Family. I'll give you the presentation we gave down there. Well, thank you for inviting us to Colorado Springs. And our talk is titled Christian Political Strategy. As with everything we do, there's often unintended consequences, and the same is true of our efforts to get judges who honor the culture of life. There have been severe unintended consequences, and we would like to recommend improvements to the effort that Christians make, and especially our national Christian leaders, to influence our culture. The goal of our meeting is to convince Focus on the Family that Christian political strategy promotes legal positivism. Now, what's legal positivism? Remember in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel said, I saw the war being waged against the saints, and that war was prevailing, and the Ancient of Days came. God came, and in verse 25, God described the enemy of his kingdom as the one who shall intend to change the law. Legal positivism rejects the divine standard of law. That's what legal positivism does. And instead of God's legality, God's declaration of law, which should be on the books, legal positivism looks at the law as it is changed by men. And some conservative Christians say, well, we would not have changed it that way, but that is the law. And we're not talking about making believe that they didn't legalize abortion, or that they are not increasing and giving into the homosexual agenda. We're talking about what should the law be, and what should we advocate as Christians. So we want to convince Focus on the Family that our efforts in our community promotes legal positivism, and when Peter said in Acts 5, we must obey God rather than men, our Christian political strategy is undermining that fundamental principle. I'm going to give you 7 lines of evidence that we, our Christian leaders in America, that we are a bad influence on the body of Christ, and that we are undermining morality in America. The first line of evidence is baby 10. She's the little girl who was intentionally killed by someone on our side, one of our pro-life heroes. The second line of evidence, pornography. Ministries no longer teach. In fact, they're afraid to teach, or they absolutely refuse to teach that pornography should be illegal. Terry Schiavo, we saw many, and we will document this. You'll hear from some of our Christian leaders. You'll see the quotes. Pro-life spokesman switched to support suicide during the battle to save Terry Schiavo, in ignorance and foolishly. And we'll demonstrate that for you. The fourth line of evidence, partial birth abortion. Now, I'm making an analogy here, but partial birth abortion, if the ban ever comes into effect, abortionists have been trained to kill babies with different methods. And how many abortions scheduled would be canceled if partial birth abortion was banned? And the answer is 0, because they'll simply use a different method. And the Germans killed countless thousands of Jews and others with a drug called Zyklon B. And the analogy is, what if we spent a decade in Germany trying to outlaw Zyklon A? Would history judge that as a reasonable, moral, wise effort? The fifth line of evidence is that homosexuals fought for legalization, to legalize homosexuality, and ministries now support this as the way the law should be. That homosexuality should be legal. We'll discuss that. And adultery. Humanists have legalized adultery, and now ministries never oppose legalized adultery. In fact, I think you will find out if you press, if you ask, if you question, our Christian leaders have joined the humanists, and they believe that even crimes like adultery should be legal. Even if they're a sin, they've lost the foundation because we have become legal positivists. Alberto Gonzalez, Rudy Giuliani, so many pro-abortion leaders are getting the support of an increasing number of pro-life leaders. And we will demonstrate that. And here is the solution, we believe. 15 years ago, James Dobson, your founder, made a pledge when he said, "I will never support a politician willing to kill a single innocent child." James Dobson's righteousness is not above that of Focus on the Family. There is only one standard of righteousness, God. And so Focus on the Family should recast its strategy consistent with your founder's pledge. Now let's look at the evidence. But before we consider Baby 10, remember Nuremberg. In Germany after World War II, there were 177 defendants put on trial. We executed lawyers. We tried judges and found them guilty of murder. And one judge, Judge Franz Schlegelberger, and his defense was this: he had to follow the law because it was the law, and Germany's supreme judge, he had to obey. We don't have a supreme judge, we have a Supreme Court in America. Only reluctantly did he uphold the bad laws, and he harbored no ill will toward Jews. He resisted sending half-Jews to concentration camps. He said in his defense, "If I had resigned, a worse man would have taken my place." In 1941, Schlegelberger obediently signed the order of execution for a Jew, Marcus Luftgas, for the crime of hoarding eggs. And the Allied Judicial Tribunal at Nuremberg found the judge guilty. And that was the just and proper verdict. Now, Hollywood made a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg, and it was Burt Lancaster as the German judge, and he is, I'm going to show you a scene, and he had just been convicted of these crimes, including murder. And Spencer Tracy plays the American judge, and he comes down to the cell of the German judge, and I'd like you to hear what was said.
If it means anything to you, you have the respect of at least one of the men you convicted. By all that is right in this world, your verdict was a just one.
Thank you. What you said in the courtroom, it needed to be said.
Judge Haywood, the reason I asked you to come those people, those millions of people, I never knew it would come to that. You must believe it. You must believe it.
Hey, Yana. It came to that the first time you sentenced a man to death you knew to be innocent.
Baby 10, the little girl intentionally killed by Justice Priscilla Owen. You know the story? I've been reading the parental notification cases that came to the Texas Supreme Court when she was a justice. And Priscilla Owen, she was a lot like Judge Schlegelberger. When baby does 1 through 9 came before her, actually it was Jane Doe's, she found creative ways to withhold her vote to kill them. But in writing her opinions, she said, of course, we have to uphold Roe v. Wade. And of course, the Texas legislature properly passed judicial bypass laws that say we have to give a teenager a right to have an abortion without her parents' notice under certain conditions. So when it came to baby doe number 10, Priscilla Owen, in the case cited right here, Texas Supreme Court case, Priscilla Owen voted to kill baby 10 over a missed deadline. It was a technicality. You see, the Texas law says that the lower court judge has to determine whether or not a girl, a teenager, could have an abortion without her parents' knowledge. And if he decides yes or no, he has to file a finding of fact by a certain date. So a lower Texas court judge ruled, not because he's a good judge, but for some process reason, he ruled that this girl, Jane Doe number 10, could not have an abortion without her parents' knowledge. And he missed the deadline for the filing of fact. So it came to the Texas Supreme Court, and Priscilla Owen, because she has been trained and confirmed by our Christian leaders to be a legal positivist, she voted, she signed the order of execution to kill baby 10 on a technicality. Legal positivism. Priscilla Owen is committed to uphold Roe v. Wade as necessary. She would be convicted at Nuremberg for the murder of baby 10. Christian legal positivist strategy has ruined Priscilla Owen. It has ruined her. She grew up in a Christian church. She taught Sunday school. She's pro-life. And she will kill an innocent child because she has to uphold the law. We must obey God rather than men. And that's what the American Family Association, and that's what Concerned Women for America, and that's what Focus on the Family need to be saying from their pulpits to instruct our judges and our officials that they do not have the right to ignore God's command, thou shalt not murder. You're going to hear from two Christian leaders audio clips, and ministries in America no longer teach that pornography should be illegal. And again, when you press them and you question them, increasingly they believe they're pro-choice on pornography, that actually men have the right to sexually exploit women and video and take photos and produce pornography and sell it. Now we have Focus on the Family, the AFA, CWA, Morality and Media, and I interviewed on my radio show the president of Morality and Media, Bob Peters. And he's been affected by legal positivism. And he will not call for the recriminalization of pornography. We've asked him twice. Now, listen to this as I'm introducing him, and I'm talking about the problem of internet pornography.
So that if a staffer clicks on some email, instantly pops up an extraordinarily vulgar pornographic image. You know, I wish there were some kind of a morality and media group. Oh, wait a minute. Who's on the line here? Is this Bob Peters?
Yes.
Hello, Bob. This is Bob Enyart out in Denver.
Hi, this is Bob Peters in New York City.
Bob, you're the president of Morality and Media?
Yes.
Well, why isn't there any?
You know, I tell you, the word that's often used when people ask me what I do, and I say I work for Morality and Media,
right?
And they say that's an oxymoron.
Fast forward to later in the broadcast.
Christian leaders who fight against pornography, this is what I've noticed. They fight against child pornography and obscenity, but they've basically conceded the sexual exploitation of women. Just give us the child pornographers and the hardcore. But when you concede on the pages of Playboy, you lost the war, and you will work your whole life, and we won't win anything. If we concede Playboy, we will not win anything ever.
Well, I loathe Playboy.
Hey, Bob, we're about out of time. The music is playing. Let me ask you this one question. Could you stand with me and call for all pornography to be outlawed?
Well, at this point in my life, I'm still working to get the adult obscenity laws enforced, which I think would be an improvement where the American people want to go from there.
But I'm not
happy
asking
to
you
support
that.
laws that go much further than our current obscenity laws do, but you need the American public to support it.
Well, Bob, then does our audience take from this that Bob Peters and Morality in Media stands for the right to sexually exploit women on the pages of Playboy?
No, but I'm
then would you stand with me and call for Playboy to be prohibited?
Well, I tell you, at this point, what I'd like to see is federal and state prosecutors enforce the constitutional obscenity laws.
All right, and that's as far as our national Christian ministries and virtually all of our churches, as I've noticed, will go. We have conceded to the humanist that men have a right to sexually exploit women, and when the Christian leaders have lost sight of God's standard, what makes us think that secular officials will toe some kind of an arbitrary boundary that now we're fighting for? Concerned Women for America spokesman Robert Knight. He's not really thought through whether porn should be outlawed. Let's hear the interview.
What we need to do is we have to start by demanding that they enforce the obscenity laws, which are on the books. They've been upheld by the courts.
Let me challenge what you just said. We have to start by enforcing the obscenity laws. If our Christian leaders are accepting, they're tolerant of Playboy and Penthouse, there's no way you're going to get a secular government to enforce other pornography laws. If the Christian leaders accept Penthouse, which they do, and they all do.
Well, no, they don't all do that.
Well, name me.
Dr. Dobson personally thinks it's all poison.
Well, oh yeah, poison, but not criminal. Focus on the Family has been very careful to call for the government to fight against obscenity and child pornography.
Right, because they're
but
basing their call on what's legal now.
Well,
what the government can actually do.
Yeah, but
apart from changing the laws.
No, what's legal now is killing children. And in some places, homosexuals to get married. You don't go by what's legal now, you go by what's right. And my point is the Christian leaders in America think that pornography should be legal. That's what they think.
I sure don't. Don't count me among them.
Well, I'm a bird.
I would allow a small town to kick Playboy and Penthouse right out of the local grocery, saying that we have different standards here. You can take this to Los Angeles or New York, but...
Why do Christian leaders tolerate the porn industry?
Well, I think everybody takes a piece of the battle.
Well, yeah, and it's appropriate. Not everyone could fight every battle in every front. But that's not my point. My point is the Christian community has misinformed the public into thinking that pornography should be legal, that adultery should be legal, that all forms of sexual immorality should be legal, and then we try to regulate it in some way. And once you've legalized...
we must be one of the hardcore groups, because we don't talk like that.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me make a challenge to you. Now the group that you're the director of, it's an affiliate of Concerned Women for America,
right.
A group that we love dearly and appreciate. You're the director of Culture and Family Institute.
Right.
Could you point to any online document or any press release where you guys have educated people saying pornography should be against the law?
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Where?
Go to our website. We've got a number of papers on pornography and how damaging it is.
Well, I'm not asking that. I'm saying, have you guys educated your members, supporters, the public, that pornography is not only a sin, it's not only dangerous, it's a crime? Could you think of a paper?
I'd have to read Jan LaRue's paper. She's our pornography expert.
All right. I'll give $1,000 to your favorite charity if you could call back in, Robert, next week and say, here's where we said that pornography should be a crime.
Hey, that's pretty good.
That is good.
Yeah, that's a reasonable offer.
That's an easy $1,000. And here's my guess. I love you guys, Robert. I hope you don't think that I'm against you guys. My point is the entire Christian community, the leadership, has completely lost its context. And we're trying to fight sexual immorality symptoms while we have allowed the main foundation to be destroyed without a peep. No Christian leaders say adultery should be recriminalized. None. And so
if you might have a point.
Did I have to pay on the $1,000 bet? What do you think? No, I didn't have to pay. I still got the money in my pocket. And remember, we're talking to Focus on the Family and Tom Minery and his right-hand men. And I said that, Tom, you know that James Dobson, Focus on the Family, and Don Wildman and his son Tim Wildman. We had Tim Wildman on our radio show just a couple months before we went to Focus, and we were discussing the same issues with the president of the American Family Association, and he was wrestling through this on the air and trying to process it. And I said, James Dobson makes frequent calls to enforce obscenity and child pornography laws, but no public statement on the legality of pornography itself. We have conceded to the enemy the right to sexually exploit women, and when our Christian leaders have done that, we cannot win the war. Terry Schiavo, pro-life spokesman, switched sides to become pro-suicide in a misguided, but not only misguided, a destructive and a wicked strategy to try to save Terry Schiavo's life. A notable goal, but a despicable effort. Hugh Hewitt, Michael Medved, Sean Hannity, Dennis Prager, Ted Haggard, they all, during the battle to save Terry, and they're just representative of 1,000 others at every level, they all affirmed the right to starve yourself or to assist in starving someone to death if you have a written directive. And their defense of Terry was, she has no written directive, so therefore we should feed her. But then these men went farther. These men went farther. Ted Haggard is the president of the National Association of Evangelicals. He was on James Dobson's radio program just, a week or two before we got there. And he stated affirmatively, I heard it with my own ears on Fox News, that if you have a written directive, then you have the right to deny yourself food and water, to starve yourself to death. It's okay to die. It's morally acceptable to die and to allow a dying person to die. But it is wrong to kill someone. It is wrong to kill an innocent person. You don't starve to death. You don't starve to death a handicapped person. So on Salem Radio Network, the largest Christian radio network in the country that's now sold, and it's gone public, so it's no longer Christian, Hugh Hewitt, who's on there, he is a Christian. He's the #1 Christian call-in radio host in America. He was on the same show with Michael Medved, a religious Jew, conservative, pro-life spokesman for what we have, and Dennis Prager, conservative, religious, pro-life spokesman. And they all agreed that if you have a written directive, you have the right to starve yourself to death. And then Dennis Prager asked the big question to Hugh Hewitt, the Christian among them. Dennis Prager asked Hugh, what if it's not a brain-damaged person, handicapped person? What if it's a quadriplegic? And Hugh Hewitt said, of course they have the same right. They have that right to a written directive. So our pro-life spokesman, de facto, not that these men have any moral standard, but our de facto pro-life spokesmen have switched sides to become pro-suicide, and our national Christian ministries gave them a pass. And some of them joined in that wickedness. National Right to Life and the Schiavo family, the Schindler family. They fought to pass a law that they hoped would protect Terry. It was called the Incapacitated Persons Legal Protection Act. The Hemlock Society, the suicide group, couldn't have passed this law because the same people would have fought against them. Because this was a pro-suicide law. This would have been the first time in federal law that the federal government would legitimize, would recognize suicide laws at the state level. Explicitly recognizing state-assisted suicide laws that permit, quote, the withdrawal of food or fluids simply with a written advance directive. And that is the law that the Christian pro-life leaders across the country were trying to pass the night when President Bush flew back to Washington, D.C. from his ranch to sign a bill. There were two bills, this and the Terry Schiavo Act, and the Terry Act passed, which was also a completely amoral, legal positivist law. Because the Terry Schiavo Act didn't say it's wrong to starve to death an innocent woman. It didn't say that. It asked our pro-choice Republican federal judiciary to reconsider whether Terry Schiavo should be killed by judicial decree. And is it any surprise that they all voted to kill her? Of course not. Countless pastors, church members, teachers, now, because the body of Christ has been immersed in legal positivism, they are accepting of assisted suicide, and that has flooded Christianity as they are urging their people to get written directives and living wills. The Terry Schiavo battle clearly showed that our judges, our pro-life Republican judges, are legal positivists who will murder the innocent. Republican justices that killed Terry, Judge George Greer, grew up in a Christian, conservative, pro-life Baptist church. He's a Republican judge. Justice William Pryor, the favorite son of the pro-life movement in America of judges who our Christian leaders fought to get confirmed, and they've now succeeded. For years they fought. He voted to kill Terry Schiavo, as did all 6 of the Reagan, Bush 1 and Bush 2 11th Circuit judges. All 6. For 25 years, a quarter century, we've been told by our Christian leaders that if we elect pro-life Republican presidents, we will get judges who honor the culture of life. 58% of the federal judiciary are judges nominated by Republican presidents, the vast majority of them in the last quarter century. And all six of the pro-life Republican presidents we were promised could change the judiciary, all 6 voted to kill Terry Schiavo. All 6. And the Republican Supreme Court rubber-stamped the judicial decree to kill her. How many of the justices on the Supreme Court, the 9 justices, were nominated by Democratic presidents? 2. The answer is 2. 7 of the 9, it's a Republican court. It's solidly pro-abortion, pro-homosexual, pro-pornography. Everything that destroys Christian morality, our judges are giving us, our judges. And it was argued by Focus on the Family to us, in person and in letter, that they didn't think that William Pryor voted to kill Terry Schiavo. At least we couldn't know. And we brought with us printouts from the official website of the 11th Circuit, and they voted twice, on March 25th and March 23rd. And if you notice, on the 25th, there was an asterisk after William Pryor's name that said he did not participate in this case because he's recovering from surgery. But 2 days earlier, on the 23rd, his name is with the majority, and they denied the rehearing of Terry Schiavo's case, basically upholding the judicial murder of that innocent woman. And there were 2 judges who dissented, a Nixon appointee and a Clinton appointee. But don't think they dissented because they were good judges. It's just a process. Because all the judges are obsessed with legal positivism. It has nothing to do with right and wrong any longer. And it's because our Christian leaders have accepted, they've adopted a strategy of legal positivism. That if it is the law, legally, it is okay, and we're going to work within that context. Let's think this through a little bit more. Other Republican justices in courts Roe v. Wade was written by a Republican judge and passed by a Republican court. The digital child porn ruling that law enforcement officials and families desperately fought against, our Republican Supreme Court said if the baby being sodomized is digitized, then it's legal. And law enforcement said, how are we supposed to fight against child pornographers when we don't know if it's digital or real? And our Republican Supreme Court voted in behalf of the child porn industry. And Focus on the Family, they know these things. And they were grieving when we got there. Grieving because of decision after decision. We got there and the Supreme Court had just said you can't have the Ten Commandments in court. Just said that the day before we got there. A Republican judge on the Ninth Circuit wrote the decision that under God and the Pledge is unconstitutional. Convicted pedophiles have the right to attract children in public parks. These decisions come from Republican judges from our pro-life presidents, many of them. Partial birth abortion. Now this is an analogy. It's as though we were in Germany and they're slaughtering the innocents by the thousands, and we work for a decade to outlaw a poison, Zyklon A. And nobody really cares because they killed the Jews with Zyklon B. And they had Zyklon C if they had to use that. So we work to outlaw partial birth abortion. That's just a method of killing unborn children. And all abortionists are trained in multiple methods to kill kids. And so we asked Tom Minery, how many Christians think the ban would stop all late-term abortions? How many Christians, Tom? If the ban takes effect, how many abortions would be canceled? And the answer is 0. None. Because Warren Hearn and George Tiller, they would simply kill these babies with a different method. And I asked, Tom, have our national ministries, have you really informed people about the ban and about what it really was? Do the millions of people, the Christian pro-lifers in your audience, do they know that not one abortion will be canceled if this ban they've spent money on and fought for 10 years takes effect? And he said, no, they don't know that. And then he had to think, well, why have we been doing this? And he came up with, well, we wanted to keep abortion in front of the public. That's the motivation for this amoral, meaningless political effort. So we argued this. We wasted the truth of partial birth abortion on a legal positivist, amoral strategy. We gave cover to countless pro-abortion politicians who support the ban. Tom Daschle, so many. They'll say, I'm not an extremist. I voted against partial birth abortion. I support the ban. And the people sitting in the pews of our legal positivist churches, they'll say, well, he's not such a bad guy. He's against abortion. And we gave cover to thousands of those who are enemies of the Lord and enemies of the family and enemies of God because of our foolish legal positivist political strategy. Partial birth abortion, the slaughter of innocent children, the graphic tools we had to show the world how evil the liberals in America are, how evil the pro-abortion politicians are. Partial birth abortion was the most powerful anti-abortion tool we would ever have, and we utterly squandered the blood of its victims. We couldn't think of anything constructive to do with those children who were dying. Nothing. Nothing more than a publicity stunt to use their blood for. And then we got into a discussion of incrementalism. And Flip Benham and some of the leaders of OSA came to Denver last week and we had a meeting. And we talked through and we worked through this issue. And we came up with an understanding that it's more effective to point out that the real problem is not incrementalism. It's when pro-lifers are violating God's principles. That's what's wrong. For example, if we fight to close down an abortion clinic and it takes 15 years and we close it, we rejoice. We don't say that was incrementalism and condemn ourselves. If we stopped abortion in Denver and in Colorado, we would rejoice. We wouldn't say it's incrementalism and condemn ourselves. If we stopped abortion in America completely, there would still be 49 million babies killed every year in the world. So it's not incrementalism. We need to rebuke our Christian pro-life leaders when they support laws that violate God's principle of thou shalt not murder. And how do you discern that? Any law that ends with, then you could kill the baby, that is an evil law. And if you support that law, you might think it's politically effective, but the truth and righteousness are never naive. And we end up working for laws that affirmatively kill the innocent, and we become the enemy. Homosexuals fought to legalize homosexuality, which ministries now support the legalization. They support the repeal of sodomy laws in America today effectively. Chuck Colson was on James Dobson's show the day we were there, and we quoted from him back in 1993. He wrote in his newsletter, Breakpoint, if homosexuals want to have relationships with the people of the same sex in the privacy of their homes, that is their right. And he was not rebuked by any of our Christian leaders. This was allowed to stand. And 3,500 years of Judeo-Christian legal precedence has been destroyed. And more so than by the homosexual activist, it's our Christian leaders who have become legal positivists, who have lost their way. Beverly LaHaye wrote about homosexuals that CWA has nothing to do with denying someone civil rights or discriminating against them. And Tom Minery stopped me and he said, Bob, we agree with that. We agree with that. Of course, that's the position. I said, Tom, I'm going to quote you in a moment. And James Dobson. So we know you agree with that. But realize what you're doing. You guys complain if a homosexual writes a textbook for first graders. Do we want homosexuals to coach our boys' 5th grade wrestling teams? Is that what we want? Perhaps a homosexual judge is acceptable to our Christian leaders because they have equal rights. They have equal rights, and then we think we've legalized homosexuality and now we want to regulate it. We want to say, well, you can't adopt kids, and you can't teach first grade, and we don't want you to coach, and we don't want you to get married. So we have created these absurd battles, these unwinnable battles to fight, because we have lost the vision of God's standard. Amen. Gary Bauer, James Dobson's, #1 political ally, wrote in the Focus magazine of homosexuals that he's willing to adopt a live and let live attitude toward what other people do in private. The problem is, it's not live and let live, it's live and let die, because tens of millions have died tortured deaths because of our acceptance of homosexuality. Tom Minery quoted on page 1 of the Denver Post, most Americans are willing to tolerate homosexuality. Tom, why is that? It leads to their tortured deaths. But we're not willing to stand up and applaud it. That's not the test of righteousness. Homosexuals fought to legalize homosexuality, which ministries now support, and the legalization and tolerance of homosexuality worldwide has led to the tortured deaths of tens of millions of people who would otherwise be alive today. And Dr. Dobson wrote that Focus would never support legislation aimed at depriving homosexuals of their basic constitutional rights. And that is a statement affirming, legitimizing homosexuality. because we don't say that about behaviors that were crimes. And I asked Tom Minery, I said, Tom, if that's your position, how about the Texas sodomy law that was up to at the Supreme Court? And he said, oh, we were fighting to keep that law. And I said, yeah, Tom, that's good. But that law meant that homosexuality was criminal. Homosexuality was criminal, and now you're arguing that homosexuality should be legal. Our Christian leaders are conflicted. They are confused because you've lost your way. You're no longer on the foundation of God's legal standard. And as the humanists change the laws, our Christian leaders are only a few years behind them. And then they forget they were ever against it in the first place. Colorado for Family Values, we fought in this state the Amendment 2 battle. And Will Perkins headed up that effort from Colorado Springs. And I interviewed him on Bob Enyart Live, October 1993. And I said, Will Perkins, will you stand with me and call for the recriminalization of homosexuality? And he absolutely refused. We've been doing this for 15 years on the air. And our Christian leaders have become legal positivists. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force could not do more to legitimize homosexuality. That means to declare legally valid. Our Christian leaders say homosexuality is a sin, the most courageous ones. It's a sin, but they say it's legal. Not only it is legal, but it should be legal. The homosexuals could not do more to legitimize homosexuality than we did nationwide during Colorado's Amendment 2 campaign. Dr. Dobson, with Will Perkins, changed 3,500 years of Judeo-Christian history. Dr. Dobson did this. How did he do it? He legitimized homosexuality. He declared it legally valid. Our leaders have lost their way. Dr. Dobson promoted this slogan, which the whole body of Christ in America took up regarding the homosexual fight. Equal rights, not special rights. And you know, there are many homosexuals who are activist strategists, and they've realized that this is very powerful for them. This is the best way for them to accomplish their agenda in the near term. Adultery. Humanists legalized adultery, a change that ministries never oppose. God gave us a simple standard to defend. You know, when you have the high ground, you could defend it from all enemies. And God put a boundary around marriage. And He said sex is only legal in marriage. Then the humanists came and they destroyed that boundary. And what's happened is brush fires began all around us. Because adultery is now legal, because the boundary around marriage has been destroyed, and because our Christian leaders have lost the vision and the truth of God's Word, now we are fighting the gay agenda, and pornography, and STDs, and strip joints, and the abortion epidemic, and AIDS, and condoms to kids, and teen pregnancy, and youth suicide epidemic, and the divorce epidemic. We're fighting these because we conceded without a battle to the humanists. And only if at least our leaders would give us hope and give us a vision. Without a vision, the people perish. How can we fight the battle when what we are fighting for is evil? Alberto Gonzales, he's George W. Bush's right-hand man, made him Attorney General, head of the Justice Department. He's a pro-abort. His position is the same as John Kerry's. He's pro-life personally. And Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York, he's not only pro-abortion, he even supports partial birth abortion, which even the most wicked person should be able to see is brutal murder. Jay Sekulow, American Center for Law and Justice, called for Gonzales' confirmation without delay because he would work to protect all Americans. He didn't even need to speak on this. He wasn't required. And he gave a vote of confidence to a blatant child killer. And Jay Sekulow is one of our leading pro-life Christian lawyers defending the unborn. And he is a legal positivist, and our Christian leaders, they don't even know what that means. We first have to explain it to them. When you disagree with Peter, when he said we must obey God rather than men, you're a legal positivist. California Christians, including the pro-lifers we spoke to up and down California, have been trained as legal positivists. They've elected pro-abortion, pro-homosexual, pro-embryonic stem cell research, Clinton-esque womanizer Arnold Schwarzenegger. Pat Robertson was asked about Rudy Giuliani on ABC, and he said, Rudy's a very good friend of mine. He's a great guy. He did a super job running the city of New York, and I think he'd make a good president. By the way, Tom Miniry was horrified by Pat Robertson's quote and by Jay Sekulow's quote. And I was glad that he was. Hugh Hewitt is training countless pro-life Christians to be legal positivists. The #1 Christian call-in radio host in America, to be willing to support even Rudy Giuliani for president. I interviewed him when he was at the Republican National Convention in New York. I'd like you to hear this.
All right, Hugh Hewitt, last question. Last night, Rudy Giuliani electrified the delegates at the Republican National Convention. And Sean Hannity has gone on the air saying that basically he'd be a great candidate for the ticket 4 years from now. Do you think he's got a place among the luminaries of the Republican Party?
There are at least a dozen different people who are going to run for president. Many of them are qualified. Rudy will have a following. He's not my first choice, but he cannot be counted out.
Would you support him if he were the party's nominee?
Yes.
Tom Miniry cringed at that point.
Okay, and so Rudy Giuliani is not only pro-choice, he even supports the radical partial birth abortion, which should be obvious to anyone that you're murdering a child who's mostly out of the mother's womb. I agree with that, Bob, but the fact of the matter remains that if you're down to Rudy Giuliani as the nominee and you're against a Democrat, more children will die unborn under the Democrat than would under Rudy. So how many? So I would prefer to save those who would perish under the Democrat than those who would perish under Rudy. So how many innocent children would Judy have to be willing to kill before you would oppose him? I mean, that's a silly argument, Bob.
That's a silly argument. How many innocent children would Rudy have to be willing to kill before you would oppose him? That's a silly argument, Bob. And it is a silly argument, because Hugh Hewitt would support Rudy Giuliani no matter how many innocent children he was willing to kill. Because when you compromise on thou shalt not murder, then where will you not compromise? And here's a summary. I'll give a summary now of these 7 lines of evidence for widespread Christian legal positivism. And by the way, Tom Miniry stated throughout, he said, this is painful. We need to hear this. This is like being smacked in the face with cold water. And he said, we need to hear this. And it's not that we know that Focus on the Family is agreeing, and please pray that they and other national ministries could consider Baby 10, the little girl intentionally killed by our favorite daughter, Priscilla Owen. In pornography, ministries now no longer teach that porn should be illegal. And Terry Schiavo, our pro-life spokesman, have switched to become pro-suicide. And partial birth abortion, we worked a decade to outlaw a technique which will not save a single innocent child. Homosexuals fought for legalization, and now our national ministries and most of our churches believe that homosexuality is a right. Adultery, humanists legalized adultery, and now ministries are even ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Gonzalez and Giuliani, pro-life leaders, increasingly supporting pro-abortion leaders. Here are our recommendations to focus on the family. That you would learn to see legal positivism, and that you would implement the Dobson Pledge within your organization. Focus on the Family should recast its strategy consistent with your founder's pledge.
Finally, I want to give a pledge to you on a political level, and I'm speaking for myself, not Focus on the Family, which is a non-political organization. I can just tell you that I have determined that for the rest of my life, however long God lets me live on this earth, I will never cast one vote for any man or woman who would kill one innocent baby.
That's the righteousness that comes from God. That's the kind of leadership it takes to win the battle. Because it's not only America, but it's the entire world. And if we think we could outmaneuver or outwit or out-trick the politicians on their turf, playing their game, we're fools. Because we can only win these kinds of battles with the power that comes from honoring God. So we closed with five specific recommendations. Focus on the strategy. I said, Tom, I hope you didn't take offense at that play on words. And that was the title of the open letter we published to James Dobson in the Gazette. Evaluate every one of your slogans, every project, and every campaign you wage for compliance with James Dobson's pledge. Legal positivist code words. Do not use words like original intent, judicial philosophy, strict constructionist, judicial activism, because that's all legal positivism. I explained that the Constitution does not give lower courts, state Supreme Courts, and federal judges on the circuit courts, it does not give these federal judges the authority to overturn the Supreme Court. Does the Constitution give a circuit judge the authority to overturn the Supreme Court, yes or no? No, it doesn't. And at this point, one of the men in the audience said, well, the Constitution doesn't mention the other courts, only the Supreme Court. And I stated, well, Article 3, Section 1 says that all judicial authority is vested in the Supreme Court and in the inferior courts as Congress shall ordain. And he said, yes, that's right. And so when we tell Priscilla Owen that we want you to be a strict constructionist, we want you to go along with original intent, we don't want you to be a judicial activist, then she has a case before her and she is a lower court justice and she has to decide whether to kill this baby or not. And if she's not an activist, if she's going by strict constructionism, she can't overturn the Supreme Court. So she is going to sign the order to execute because she is following the legal positivist strategy of our Christian leaders. What should we tell our judges to do in that circumstance? They have two options, and only two moral options. They could resign, or they can issue a ruling that honors God and says murder is wrong. And then our Christian leaders say, don't you realize that they will be kicked out of office if they do that? And the path to the abolition of abortion runs through 100 judges losing their seats. We quoted James, you ask and do not receive because you ask amiss. Our political and public call should be, we want judges who fear God and will protect the innocent. And I appreciate your agreement, but do our Christian national leaders have the courage to say that? They do not. They are ashamed of those words because they think the battle we are in requires something more worldly, something more witty, something more subtle. Avoid focus on process. Make sure that the primary strategy behind all of your social efforts is fundamental morality. Legal positivism absorbs people into process. So James Dobson, when he lost the filibuster vote, which would have done what? Outlaw abortion in America? No, it was a minor rules change, utter process. He said on his radio show the next day that he went home and he was so depressed and he went to bed early and he pulled the covers up over his head. Over process. As though if we got more Republican judges, righteousness would flood America. And finally, we asked, when you are setting your goals, create a wish list of laws that God would want America to have, and then use that to design a path toward God's idea of good government. And if they did that, they would not go astray. They would not lose their way. And our Lord can be honored when our Christian leaders empower the entire body of Christ with the clear vision that we must fear God and protect the innocent. Thank you all. I hope you could see the solid biblical principles in that presentation. At Denver Bible Church in Operation Save America, what are we saying? We are not saying that America is Israel. We know it's not. We know that the Lord is not sitting at the desk in the Oval Office. We are not calling for a theocracy where the church takes the place of the government. But we are saying that it's no longer a justice system. Now it's just a system. Christians, and especially our Christian leaders, need to realize that God has revealed the foundation of a criminal code in the 10 Commandments. Of the 10, there are 4 that all governments need to honor and uphold. Do not murder, do not steal, do not commit adultery, and do not commit perjury. That is, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. God does not expect us to enforce the symbolic ordinances that He gave to Israel in order to teach spiritual truths, such as the kind of clothing they should wear, or food they should eat, or the feast that they should keep. But as Christian leaders, we need to teach the flock and thereby teach the people the fundamental principles of right and wrong that God has revealed in His Word. Please stay in touch with Operation Save America and me. I'm Pastor Bob Enyart, and you can tune into our radio show on the internet at kgov.com. God bless you.